Hey everybody, it's John Kraska with EveryLibrary. The EveryLibrary Institute. It is National Library Week 2025. We made it. April 7th, 2025, National Library Week. Folks, it has been a time, and we have a lot to discuss tonight. We have a lot to discuss all week. We're spending some time together at a moment that is extraordinarily unusual for libraries, and I spend a lot of time thinking about libraries. I've been doing EveryLibrary now as one of the co-founders and executive director for over 12 years. EveryLibrary is set up as a national political action committee for libraries. If you're just stumbling upon this, you can find more about our work at everylibrary.org. We work on public library, school library, academic library issues. Sometimes it's about funding. Sometimes it's about going out and getting a really good bill to pass somewhere. Sometimes it's about block and tackle against really bad bills. And in the last couple of months, it's also been about trying to help preserve the integrity of the library funding formula in the federal government. We're working right now to save the Institute of Museum and Library Services, IMLS. Four little letters, about $300 something million worth of funding from the federal government. A lot of it goes to support the infrastructure of state libraries, which are like the State Department of Education, State Department of Transportation, State Department of this, State Department of that. And our president, along with the Doge team, has decided to shut it down. It's currently going to court to try and preserve it. America in 2025 is not the America that I was expecting necessarily as a straight white average dude from the suburbs. All right, I want to talk tonight a little bit about nonfiction here during National Library Week. I think it's an important thing for us to be doing. We had a wonderful literary festival back in February for Library Lovers Week. We had a great Banned Books one back during October. Yeah, October for Banned Books Week. It's National Library Week. I called an audible. I want to talk to nonfiction authors. I want to talk to memoirists and cookbook authors later tonight. I want to talk to people who do science writing. And I get the pleasure of bringing in our first of the week. Let me work on, I got to do my own producing tonight. Let me bring in Deborah. Deborah, hi. How are you tonight?
Hi, John. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Let me read the official bio, and then we'll get to it. So Deborah Taffa is the director of the MFA Creative Writing Program at the Institute of American Indian Arts. Her memoir, Whiskey Tender, which we're going to be talking about tonight, was a finalist for the 2024 National Book Award. Congratulations. And as well as long-listed title for the 2025 Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Nonfiction. The memoir is named a top 10 book of 2024 by The Atlantic and Time Magazine, as well as top books for NPR, Elle, Esquire, Audible, Publishers Weekly. You are doing some extraordinary things in the literary space right now, and you are an editor emeritus of the River Styx literary magazine. I got to talk to you a little bit about Iowa while we're going to, like just that whole thing. And is an enrolled citizen of the Quetzal Nation in Laguna Pueblo. Today's conversation is sponsored by Authors Against Book Bans. And Deborah comes to us from the great team at Harper Perennial, which is an imprint of HarperCollins. Deborah, again, thanks for spending a little bit of time with us tonight.
You're doing important work. I'm happy to join you.
Oh, that's very nice of you. And, in the green room, we didn't touch on Authors Against Book Bans. I wanted to say thank you for being here as part of that community as well. So,
their work is very important in this day and age. So,
oh my gosh, and they're great partners. We'll talk a little bit more about them, in a little bit, because I want to talk about your book. I want to talk about your process as a writer. I want to talk about then libraries and the role of libraries in your life. Whiskey Tender, it's a coming of age story. And I'm assuming that you and I are contemporaries. I'm 54 years old. I was reading this, but as a white guy from the suburbs, and your story is set in both reservation life as well as that mainstreaming of life experience. I don't think this is so easy. Oh, we're having some microphone issues here, Deborah.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay,
good. Kind of scratchy.
Oh, it must be the paper. I'm sorry, I was rattling something. Is that better?
Very good. Yes, much better. Thank you.
Okay.
So don't worry. It's a live event. It's for fun. Yeah. So again, the idea that you and I are contemporaries, but we're not. But we are. at the same time, the American experience. You didn't necessarily use the word borderland, but there is a borderland liminal space that your memoir crosses over time and time again.
Mhm.
Can you tell me a little bit about why you wanted to bring this story out?
Well, I had a lot of internal pressure to figure out who I was, in especially in confronting the concept of the American dream. So you're raised up in these borderlands, as you call them, which is I think is a wonderful definition for where I was. And you see on the television set places on the East Coast, you see sort of mainstream America, and your own family and your own culture is not reflected in anything that you're seeing. And so I guess in some ways, most memoirists are trying to mine that gap between who they think they are and who they actually are, or how they're seen by society. And for me, it was a way to gain control of over my narrative, to kind of look out at America and say, wait a minute, how do Americans perceive Native American people like my father? And where do I think the stereotypes go too far? Or where can I correct the mainstream story to talk about the accomplishments and the contributions of people who come from my part of the world? And so, I worked at this book for a good 15 years, possibly even longer, but I mean, really with focus for at least 12. I
Hmm.
took a very long time to publish it after I left Iowa City, because a memoir is all about what you cut. And in order to know what to cut from a life story, everything that's ever happened to you, you really have to know who the point of telling is. Who am I writing this book for? And that can take time to kind of decide on.
Was there an inciting incident 12 or 15 years ago that made you say, I need to start writing this? Or
Um, I think I grew up in a family of oral storytellers, and my father was this really tough as nails guy, who was an ex-con. And coming from his tribal history, what he did was tell stories. So we would sit around the campfire, we would sit around the living room at night or a fireplace, and he would tell us stories. And so I was raised up in this appreciation for all of the ways in which a really powerful story can kind of aid and abet you in times of trouble. There were all sorts of mythologies. And then my mother was she was a reader. She dragged us to the libraries every summer, and in the desert it's hot.
Mhm.
We would go there because it had air conditioning, and we would just lay among the stacks of books and read all day. I started reading when I was 4 years old, well before I went to kindergarten. And so I don't think that there was ever a time in my life when I didn't consider myself a storyteller.
Mhm.
And it was more a situation where I kept waiting, because in Native country, it's really taboo to kind of center stage yourself and talk about, we do the Beowulf where we introduce our clans. I'm from the Big Badger Little Corn clan. I'm from the Keepers of the Water. These are all of my relatives. My mom is one of 15 kids. My dad is one of 10. This is the tribal leadership I come from. These are the politicians' names. And so to kind of put yourself front and center is not something you do as a 20-year-old.
Mhm.
I had a family. I did a lot of other things first. And then I think I finally reached the point where I thought, okay, I can maybe start trying to speak. And from there, it took much longer than I thought it would to figure out the correct structure and what to tell versus what to cut, like I said before.
Well,
It,
that's absolutely. I get that, and I'm not trying to tell my own story here, but I do understand what you're saying. At a certain point, so I started off in college as a playwright,
mm,
and I spent a semester at it and said I don't know what story I want to tell yet, and I switched over from playwriting to being a stage manager, which I really
mm,
enjoy. The
mhm.
production and supporting things like that. Until you're ready to tell it, it's not possible to tell it. I mean, you are right now working not only in a creative environment for yourself, but the work that you do at I want to make sure I get it right, the Institute of American Indian Arts. I mean,
Yes.
is that so? What's the format there? Do you spend time with the students, or do you teach? Like, here's a pedagogy, or like, how do you? Like, what's your
Yeah.
role there?
Yeah. It's a one-on-one mentorship
Is it
program.
okay?
So it graduated Therese Mayotte and Tommy Orange, and it came out of the gates with incredible power. It was created originally by Sherman Alexie and John Davis.
Hmm.
It's existed for 12 years. Students come to campus 10 days in January and 10 days in July. And in that period of time, we do give craft talks on everything from creating a persona for yourself on the page, if you're writing memoir, to character development in novels, to line breaks in poetry. We also teach screenwriting. So those are our 4 fields. We have graduated 2 of the television writers for the hit television show Reservation Dogs from our program.
Really?
So it's a who's who for Native American authors.
Mm-hmm.
I am the director of the program, which means that I can choose to teach or I can just organize the mentors who work with me. Laylee Long Soldier, Sherwin Bitsui, Pam Houston. We have a roster of about 15 mentors that work with me, and we have a student body of about 40 people. And the good thing about it for me was that having studied in Iowa City and having lived in the Midwest for a long time, I never had the opportunity to study creative writing with Native teachers. My teachers were overwhelmingly white.
Mm-hmm.
I had a few Black professors. That was about it.
Mm-hmm.
And coming out to Santa Fe, returning to my ancestral homeland, was really rewarding for my writing because it lifted the burden of representation off my shoulders. I think there's a way in which creatives can kind of squeeze the life out of something because they think it's so important. My book has to do X, Y, Z in society. It's very important because it's highlighting hidden histories and governmental policies that Americans don't know about. And you keep trying to perfect it, and it's really hard to let it go. So my thesis advisor in Iowa wrote to me once a year after I left and kept saying, "What are you doing? Your book was ready to go when you left. Why are you waiting?" And I was waiting because I was just revising it and revising it and revising it. I was so afraid. And when I got out to Santa Fe, suddenly I realized that I was part of a much larger art movement, that maybe I could discover like the Native American version of Toni Morrison at the age of 27 in the program, or that I could help people publish books and that their books were doing what I wanted my book to do for society in a lot of ways. So suddenly that burden that I was feeling really kind of faded, and I was given the gift of being a team player in a mutually supportive environment. And I can't believe how important it has been to me in my sort of emotional and psychological well-being as an artist.
There is something that is very profound about taking on the responsibility of mentoring, because you have to when you're, well, forgive me, not you have to, but if you don't have your own act in order, how do you help somebody else get their act in order? By being someone's mentor or guide, or at least their ear or their reflection point, you have to have taken the time for yourself as well. And that's really an extraordinary thing. The craft of memoir does that, but the added burden of having memoir where you have to navigate not only truth and recollection, but you have to preserve a culture.
Mm-hmm.
That is not a culture that's well known by
Yes.
mainstream America. There's a lot of burden in that.
Yes, it's very frightening. I mean, you do not want to get it wrong. When I'm the first person from the Yuma Quetzal Nation ever to have a book published with a big publishing company, and we've had a playwright, we have a filmmaker, we have not had a novelist or a memoirist
Hmm.
until I, came into the market. And so just knowing that there are my people in Southern California and children who came out to they brought out a group of kids, and they brought out some of our culture bearers, our bird dancers and gourd singers to an event in Tucson. And it was very emotional for me to see the community, that they have a way to look in the mirror and to see how I navigated my childhood, because it's a very difficult thing to grow up Indigenous in the United States.
Well, so one of the scenes, two scenes in the book besides your own Gen X story, and I want to come back. I want to arc to that. One is your grandfather signing up for World War II to go serve right after Pearl Harbor, and your grandmother going into labor because she was so concerned, and the humanity of that, but also, everything I know about Native Americans in World War II comes from a couple of movies,
Mm-hmm.
and the idea that part of my question is why did they go, given the way that this country treated them, and why did they go and show up? I have
I
to.
mean, they experienced the dangers of fascism,
Mhm.
and they were hoping that the United States and its concept of democracy would be true to its word. I think that Native Americans in that era, they really believed that they could resolve some of the issues that they faced through legal means. And it
Hmm.
wasn't until the rise of the Black Panthers and the civil rights movement that the DAPL, the Dakota Access Pipeline version of protest, emerged in Native America, where people said, what we need to do is go out and protest and take over Alcatraz. So there was sort of a clear generational divide in the way the American Congress, the Congress of American Indians, which my grandfather was a part of,
Hmm.
he was the president of the intertribal, the Arizona All Intertribal Council. They believed that they could do things via legal means, and I think, they were, when you think about Black Panthers, you think about the butler, who is someone who's showing society that they can be the civilized version that America says they cannot be. So
Hmm.
they're trying to gain rights via this sort of behavior that the next generation completely fell out of line with. But there's more to it than that. I think that Native Americans very much think of the United States still to this day as our ancestral homelands.
Hmm.
And so when other people talk about leaving to go to Canada or taking off to go to some foreign country because they've disidentified with the United States goals in this Trumpian era,
Hmm.
that's a really hard thing for me to say, for example. Why
Hmm.
should I be the one to leave my homeland, to abandon the country and go somewhere else? It feels like the worst bitter way of losing is to give up on it.
Hmm.
And so there was really a desire to protect homeland and to fight for what they thought was a Native American ideal. Democracy was, so many people think that the Iroquois nation and the Confederacy's version of politics was heavily relied upon in the writing of our Constitution by Benjamin Franklin. And I believe that it's true.
Hmm.
So I think that their hearts were in the right place. It was a complicated
Yeah.
time.
No, it's interesting because your grandfather and my great uncles, served together in World War II, and my great uncles were, I'm sorry, not my great uncles, my uncles. My mother is much younger than her brothers. They were fighting in World War II when she was in diapers. Sorry, mom.
Mhm.
But they were there. In one of them was in Germany. One of them was in the Pacific Theater, and the one in Germany was in Germany because he spoke German, because his father spoke and his mother spoke German, and because that's where they came from.
Mhm.
It was in Austria,
They were
and
immigrants. Mhm.
that my grandparents were immigrants. My uncles fought their homeland. In effect.
Mhm.
Um, it's a complicated thing. Your father goes on. There's another segment here. So your dad, sometime in 1974, five maybe.
Mhm.
There's a scene here where your father is. He's a funny guy. I mean, there's a lot of humor in this memoir too. I think it's.
Oh, I'm happy that you see that. I
I
tried to
do.
affect that. We laugh a lot, and he's still a really funny guy to this day.
You see? Okay, well, tell him I'm
Mhm.
talking about him because he's. It's your father's in the backyard. Uh, you goes to the back door. You go to the back door to the kitchen. You overhear your father listen to a new record. Okay,
Mhm.
and I can picture this happening. Myself. The voice was a black minister played by the comedian Richard Pryor. He was talking like he was ancient in the skit. He said, "We are gathered here today to celebrate this year of the bicentennial. In the hope of freedom and dignity, we're celebrating 200 years of white folks kicking ass." This is Richard Pryor. The
Yeah.
audience hooted and laughed on the record. "We offer this prayer, and this prayer is, how long will this bullshit go on?" Deborah, I mean, we're about to hit the American 250th in 2026, and we've
Mhm.
seen. I mean, it's the Institute of Museum and Library Services now has its homepage calling for patriotism and American exceptionalism. We have the
Mhm.
Smithsonian, which has the same sort of pressures on it. We've got the Kennedy Center. We've got a lot of different mainstream American cultural organizations that have not been very kind to Native Americans to begin
Mhm.
with, now looking at even becoming whiter and more whitewashed. I mean,
Mhm.
we're sitting here 50 years from when your father, and then the movement into the Black Panthers and activism. You've got a whole segment here about talking about Dennis Banks,
Yeah,
where
the rise of the American Indian movement.
that's right. He's like the Indian Malcolm X, Bobby. Forgive me, Bobby's your
My
brother,
cousin.
your cousin.
My
Forgive me.
cousin. Mhm.
That I don't know who that is. Bobby Essence Fries. He's like, you don't know who that is? He asked you. He's like the Indian Malcolm X, and those guys are like the Indian Black Panthers.
I tried to trace sort of the national movements alongside the really close to the body story of the child. So I think there's a way in which this memoir is written like a novel and
Mm-hmm.
it scopes in and then it scopes out without any harsh transitions. I don't use white space to kind of dump historic information on you and then go back to a personal narrative
That's
like a lot
true.
of nonfiction does.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what makes it a memoir is it sounds and it reads close to a novel.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, how heartbreaking. I think in this country today, they're trying to say that we should be afraid of diversity. But the truth is, we have lived next to each other for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think almost everyone loves to go out and eat sushi one night and Ethiopian the next.
Mm-hmm.
And then to have, some good Southern barbecue on Saturday or Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
We like to travel internationally,
Like
go
the
to
first.
Greece, go to Thailand. Like we shouldn't feel so afraid of each other but they're trying to make us feel afraid. And I guess the thing for me is that I'm looking for a new definition of what it means to be American. And I think that Americans from all cultures have contributed in very meaningful ways to where we are today, to the success story that we have created.
Mm-hmm.
And we're seeing that success plummet in real time with the stock market. We're seeing that success plummet with the violence and people turning against each other. And I mean, you mentioned your uncles fighting in Germany. I married an immigrant who grew up in Milan, and my mother-in-law tells me stories about how in Milan they couldn't go out and play in the neighborhood near the rubble when they were kids because they were buried munitions that could explode. Imagine if in downtown Santa Fe we had bombs that had yet to be discovered. In many ways, Americans have been spoiled. And we think that we have had great problems, but those problems could get bigger pretty quick if we don't learn to live with each other. And I think that's what literature affects in this country. I think it provides a lens through which people gain empathy for stories that are not their own. I can't tell you how many readers I have encountered who have told me, I really identify with this story of the model minority. Like you left the reservation, you entered mainstream society, and your parents put pressure on you to excel. Or I really identify this story of a mother who wants to bury her family lineage because she's embarrassed of being called indigenous. A lot of Mexican and Central American and South American people have told me that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people from all walks of life have told me, your father and your grandfather remind me of my grandfather who fought in World War II,
Mm-hmm.
and they're Irish. So
Yeah.
this is what literature does. It creates empathy among people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's so important that we keep our books from being banned.
I agree with you. You have an intersection point here, I think, between memoir as empathy, memoir as a form of memory, and I'm not using that word twice, but also memoir as activism, that I think is really interestingly balanced in your telling. And forgive me for not noticing how gently you taught me things without that white space that you were talking about a moment ago. I didn't notice it until you told me, and it's nice to be able to talk to the author and let her know that that I didn't feel you got me in a good way.
Yeah. Well, that I wanted it to be mimetic in terms of the way that the government interferes in indigenous lives through the decades is that it is intrusive and it's folded into the everyday realities. So my father, for example, was trained by a federal program called the Relocation Act or
Mm-hmm.
Public Law 959. And this law was designed to train Native American men who had no employment opportunities on their home reservations to go to cities to gain trades for jobs that no other American would want. I mean, most
Mm-hmm.
Americans don't want to work in a coal mine or a coal-fired power plant, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or a nuclear power plant. Those are not jobs that people typically want. They're dirty, they're exhausting, they're tiring.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were so many different ways. The nuclear colonization of New Mexico, the atomic bomb was tested just south of where my grandma Esther had grown up in our home Pueblo, where my uncle right now is currently in governor. He was installed as governor on January 1st.
Oh,
No one
congratulations.
talks about like there are so many cancers that come out of the Navajo, Hopi, and Laguna Reservation from those years of uranium and uranium pilings, and we're downwinders. We were affected by the atomic bomb. I didn't want those things to feel like they were over here. For me, the only ethical way to expose my family's suffering and trauma and humor and laughter and kind of put them on the main stage for everyone to see was to give the book context in terms of hidden histories and governmental policies that would be educational for people. The trick was, craft-wise, to try to make it fun and to try to weave it in so it didn't feel didactic or like I was standing on a pulpit trying to instruct people. I was telling a story, and that story should be entertaining.
Oh, I think that you've succeeded. There's a couple. You mentioned a little while ago about the library. It is National Library Week, Deborah. We got to go
Yes.
back around to that.
Mhm.
And there's
Yeah.
also a couple of vignettes in the book about it, including the girl who got arrested by the library.
Yeah. Mhm.
So I'm not assuming that this was all positive, but at the same time, there's a role that libraries have in your life. I'd love for you to share it with our viewers a little bit. And also the thought of like, okay, it's libraries in 2025. How should it be going?
Yeah. Well, on Sunday, I looked up if the Santa Fe Public Library was open because I wanted to go check out some books and it was closed, and I was very sad. I
Hmm.
think sometimes libraries don't have enough funding.
Hmm.
The library at the Institute of American Indian Arts is a wonderful tool for me to have for research
Hmm.
because they have access to books that I could not find anywhere else. So in the early years of writing this book, I went quite often to the Arizona Historical Society to use their microfiche machine to find old articles about my grandfather and my great grandfather who were they were very active in tribal politics. And I would find little snippets of books and little articles about them.
Hmm.
While here at IAIA, in the final phase of editing, after the book was sold to Harper, in that final year, my editor asked me, "What would you like to do?" And I said, "Well, so much of the history that's in this book is family lore. I would like to go in and actually do research to kind of find dates and specifics about the stories that I heard as a child." For example, my father grew up in an army tent, and he didn't have shoes when he was a little boy. He ran around in the desert barefoot. And at a certain juncture, maybe around the time he was 10 years old or so, his father and his grandfather and a bunch of tribal community members put them in trucks and they drove out to California and they dismantled these prefabbed homes and brought them back to the reservation to construct them. I had heard that story my entire life. How exciting to find a book in the library that told me exactly where he went. It was a military home that they got. So
Hmm.
libraries are important for me in terms of their like the research they provide, opportunities that they provide, but it's also just pure enjoyment. I have grown up in libraries, and when I meet people who tell me that they've read my book by checking it out at the library. I know some authors are offended. They're like, "Oh, I want you to buy my book." I'm thrilled. I'm like, "This is wonderful." The
Yeah.
library gives access to readers that otherwise couldn't afford to read.
Hmm.
And with our attention spans really reducing because we're all dopamine addicted by our phones, reading has become something that's very important for children and adults. Children need to learn to do it. Adults need to remember how to do it. It's
Hmm.
vital.
Hmm. Well, one of the great privileges of doing this work here at Every Library is not only do I get to go meet a lot of librarians and work on behalf of a lot of libraries, not only do we get to do some good work around opposing censorship and discrimination campaigns, I also get to do this kind of thing because it was a good idea to get together with a bunch of cool authors, and
That's
have
right.
these kind of conversations. I mean, I get to
Mhm.
broaden my own horizons. So, with memoir as activism, what are your thoughts about 2025 and where we're heading? Because honestly, your family has a tremendous amount of experience in activism.
Mhm.
You yourself are politically not only aware but involved, and I think culturally, historically, better than most people. I mean, you mentioned a moment ago about how your forebears fought fascism already.
Mhm. Mhm.
Where are we
Yeah.
going, Deborah? What are you
Yeah.
looking at?
Well, if I have to try to look through at what we're currently enduring kind of through a slant lens to to kind of find hope for myself, it is that before we were the minority in terms of having always been kind of the enemy of the state, from the beginning in this country. Native Americans were against capitalism and the exploitation of natural resources, and we were kind of a voice shouting in the dark. And on television shows, Tonto was never allowed to speak because he would have countered this idea of American exceptionalism.
Mm-hmm.
And now more people are in a position of being forced to be minorities. They're in an oppressed situation, white women among them.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea that we had arrived at some post-racial era with the Obama administration has gone to die. And I think the stakes have risen enough that there are many powerful people in society that are understanding that it's going in the wrong direction. I think we're mighty if we pool our resources together and think about this through the lens of class. I think that the billionaires and the multimillionaires are taking over in a way that's going to hurt all of us. But we are a power if we can stand together. It takes courage. They're suing law firms that are capitulating.
Mm-hmm.
They are suing universities that are bending over,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to take some pride in what it means to be an American. We're going to have to wrestle back this image that we want to have in the world versus the one that we're developing. And a lot of people are going to have to stand up together. For me personally, I'm not good at the hot take, and I don't like to be on social media.
Mm-hmm.
Some people like to go out and march and do the fighting on
Mm-hmm.
Instagram and Twitter. For me, it's very quietly tending to the writing that I do, knowing that the next book will eventually come out and that I will continue to do what I'm doing at a slow pace. No matter what, no one will stop me.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has to find their own individual mode to protest and resist, but it's going to require courage.
I think that's prescient, and it's something that we're trying to do from an infrastructure perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not much of a marcher myself. What we do is we build websites and
Yes.
move people forward. We've done a tremendous amount. You'd be proud of us, Deborah, around this particular crisis for the Institute of Museum and Library Services. I want to invite people during National Library Week. Gosh, I wish I would have been able to put up something that was more fun than this. But I want to invite people to take an action with us on it. Because the infrastructure of society is under attack, in my perspective as well.
Yeah, their structural oppression is very different than sort of lateral oppression from your peers. And the fact that it's becoming embedded in the institution is the scariest thing.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to think that we've reached the point of no return. It's happened much faster than I thought it would have. We're only 3 months in, or not even 3 months in,
Mm-hmm.
to this new administration, and they're dismantling our protections very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to take a lot of strength, and individual parents are going to have to teach their children at home because it's not going to happen in the schools. So in some way, we're reverting to the way it was in my childhood, which is unfortunate because it was a time when I felt very gaslit, and America kind of was selling propaganda to me. And it felt like this mirage, which is a metaphor I play with in the book quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And, you don't want your children to grow up that way. Kids that don't have positive representations of themselves in the media, they do not know how to be contributing members of society. So if conservative people are listening to this podcast or this interview, it's important to realize that by giving them these positive representations of their population, you avoid having them become criminals, because people who don't know how to be a contributing member of society, people who don't have models and heroes and joyful endings and portrayals of themselves in the media that represent positive outcomes, they're not going to be happy children. And it feels like people are becoming more and more frightened of each other. And it's not a way to solve it by trying to cancel entire cultures. That's just going to make it worse.
It's going to be what are we fighting for? What are we fighting for?
Mm-hmm.
Deborah, you've been very kind to me for spending some time with me. I want to put up your website on the screen. I should have done this earlier.
Oh,
I
that's
apologize.
Nice. No,
Folks,
you're
if
fine.
you want to follow Deborah's work, Whiskey Tender, directly from HarperCollins, at your local library, and also the bookstores. Please buy. One of the things I like about a library is that you can try it out before you buy it. But there's also a lot of folks that give gifts because they first read it from the library, and this is an interesting one. Also, book clubs. This is a great book club read. We didn't even touch about religion. We didn't talk about faith life.
There's a lot going on in this book.
There's a lot about it. Yeah, I mean, grown up Catholic myself, but we'll tease that for our listeners. How's that?
Okay, always here if you need me, John. I'm very happy with what you're doing in your organization. Keep up the good work.
And thank you for being part of it. Again, the Authors Against Book Bans and the team over there for bringing us together. Deborah, I'm going to do the traditional wave and say thank you to you and to all of our watchers. I'm going to hit end stream, but I'm going to talk to you in the green room afterwards, okay?
Okay.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a nice night. I'll see you in a little while for our next one, 9 p.m. Eastern. Okay, cheers. Gotta find the banner. There it is. Wait, hold on. There we go.